Well, hey guys, how are you today? I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. I just wanted to pop on here today and share some information with you that I found. Well, actually, some years ago, way before my mother passed, we were having a conversation, and we were talking about the phrase in the Pledge of Allegiance that says one nation under God. We were talking about that. So she made the statement that when she was in school, that was not there. But all my life and all of my schooling, it was there. And not only that, there's the phrase on the statement on our money was not always there either. So I was thinking, when you're thinking about this country and the state that it's in and the different arguments going back and forth about our country and what our country stands for and everything, I decided to look it up. Wouldn't you know, let's see, what site did I go to? I went to history. I went to the history. Is it the History Channel? So let me tell you where this article came from. The article title is Why Eisenhower Added Under God to the Pledge of Allegiance During the Cold War. The author is Becky Little. It's on the website History, and it was last updated June 22nd, 2022. It was published by A&E Television Networks. So I was like, oh my, because all my life, that phrase was there. And many of you who are, around my age or younger, all your life, that phrase has been there. So let me read it to you. It says the pledge, as recited by U.S. school children, wasn't standardized until World War II, and it didn't contain under God until 1954. So I was one in 1954. So it didn't get there until 70 years ago. By this time, the United States had been formed and Constitution written and Bill of Rights and all these things had already been written and solidified. So it says that on June 14th, 1954, President Dwight Eisenhower signed a bill to insert the phrase under God into the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance that children recited every morning in school. Previously, the pledge, originally written in 1892, so even after the signing of the Declaration of Independence and all of that, this pledge was not written until 1892. And it had contained no reference to religion. We don't learn this in school. The push to add under God to the pledge gained momentum during the Second Red Scare, a period when U.S. politicians was keen to assert the moral superiority of U.S. capitalism over Soviet communism, which many conservatives regarded as godless. Court cases about whether students should recite the pledge had already reached the U.S. Supreme Court in 1940, before under God was added. In the decades after the 1954 edition, there were numerous other lawsuits related to the pledge. So, and there's a video. I'm going to link that video to this. So the original pledge was for marketing. Marketing purposes. Who knew? I didn't. Did you know? Now you do. The first version of the Pledge of Allegiance was written for the Columbian Exposition in October 1892 to mark the 40th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' arrival in the Americas. Historians have long identified its author as Francis Bellamy, an ordained Baptist minister and Christian socialist who got a job working for the family magazine Youth Companion. In 2022, historians raised new questions about whether Bellamy wrote the pledge himself or stole it from a boy who submitted it to the magazine. Either way, as a market gimmick, Bellamy put together a program for schools to use to mark the Columbian Exposition and successfully lobbied Congress to support the program. Part of this program was the Pledge of Allegiance, which originally read, how many of you knew this? I pledge allegiance to the flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Nothing like what we have been saying. And it was a marketing gimmick. Like the magazine's other marketing strategies, which included sending flags and pictures of George Washington to schools, the pledge was part of a push for Americanization. Bellamy was one of the many Protestant Americans of Northern European heritage who believed that new immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, many of them Catholic, were harmful to the American way of life, and that they needed to assimilate. Think of those things. The pledge standardized during World War II. Over the next few decades, schools and organizations that chose to recite the pledge, they chose to recite it, wasn't mandated, used variations of Youth Companion's version or made up their own pledges. So it wasn't even, like what we had now. It wasn't standardized. One June 22, 1942, just over, that don't even make sense, but on June 22nd, 1942, just over 6 months after the United States entered World War II, the U.S. government officially recognized a standard version of the pledge for the first time when Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the U.S. Flag Code, 1942. The pledge in the Flag Code was a version of the Youth Companion's original pledge and still contained no reference to God. Even so, the issue of whether children should recite the pledge in school came up in 2 Supreme Court cases. So they always had this dispute about this pledge. In 1940, the court ruled in Minersville School District versus Garbitsit that forcing Jehovah's Witnesses to recite the pledge in school was not a violation of their religious freedom. Jehovah's Witnesses consider saluting a flag an act of worship. 3 years later, the court reversed the decision in West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, in another case including Jehovah's Witnesses, ruling that forcing students to recite the pledge was a violation of their First Amendment rights. Interesting. Things that you don't know. One of the first major groups to call for the addition of Under God to the pledge was the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal organization. I was getting ready to say something else, but we're not going to get into the Knights of Columbus. In 1952, it began petitioning the federal government to add the phrase to the Pledge of Allegiance. U.S. Representative Louis Rampart, a Democrat from Michigan, was persuaded by the petition and introduced the legislation to add the phrase to the pledge. Rampart argued that adding the phrase would give students a deeper understanding of the real meaning of patriotism. So it had nothing to do actually with God, but patriotism, while adding that it could also provide a bulwark against communism. Now, I'm going to put the definition of patriotism and bulwark in the comments so everybody will know what that means and what they were actually talking about. In February 1954, Eisenhower attended a sermon by Reverend George Dockery at the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C. that greatly influenced his ideas on the subject. And I may have pronounced this man's name wrong, but I'm going to spell it out, Doccherty. To omit the words under God in the Pledge of Allegiance is to omit the definitive factor in the American way of life. This is what this reverend preached. He discounted the right of atheists to object, arguing that an atheistic America is a contradiction in terms. Because if you deny the Christian ethic, you fall short of the American idea of life. With Eisenhower on board, the campaign to adopt the phrase had more momentum. On June 14th, which is Flag Day, that I don't hear a lot of celebrating about no more. I know when I was a spring chick, they did, but I don't hear a lot about that no more. Eisenhower signed a law adding under God to the Pledge of Allegiance 2 years later. And I didn't know that. Again, my mother had told me, but I didn't know this. 2 years later, Eisenhower also made "In God We Trust" the United States official motto. It did not appear on paper currency or stamps before the 1950s. So prior to the 1950s, "In God We Trust" was not on our money. Prior to, it wasn't on our money. So the legal challenges to Under God. The addition of Under God to the pledge led to new lawsuits about whether it violated the rights of students and teachers. In the 1950s and 60s, the prominent atheist Joseph L. Lewis filed lawsuits against the state of New York over the pledge. Over the next several decades, several cases were filed in different states, with the most prominent cases reaching the federal courts and even the U.S. Supreme Court in the 21st century. In 2004, the Supreme Court sided against Michael Newdow, who objected to his daughters having to say the pledge in Elk Grove Unified School District versus Newdow, on the grounds that he didn't have sufficient custody over his daughter to make the complaint. So they denied it because they denied it. In 2010, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against Newdow in a separate but related lawsuit, arguing the pledge didn't violate student rights because they can choose not to participate. So, a lot of the controversy that we've been having about the pledge and different things, it just reminds you, it to me, in my opinion, prior to Eisenhower adding under God to the Pledge of Allegiance, it was not there at all. 2 years later, 1956, In God We Trust was not on the monies. In God We Trust was not on our monies. Now, mind you, the United States was old enough to know if that's what they wanted. That's my thought. It could have been initiated during Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War. It could have been initiated during the British and American War. It could have been initiated long before this. I'm just saying. Because I need y'all to think about that. Because we all up in arms pushing a marketing gimmick that they came up about Columbus and the Americas. We all know Christopher Columbus did not discover this place where we're at in the United States, these Americas, but that's a whole nother story, and I'm not going to get into it. But I want everybody to let me know what your thoughts are about that, because most of the people that I know grew up saying this Pledge of Allegiance with under God, one nation under God, indivisible. That's how we grew up. Prior to that, people that came out of my mother's generations, that's in their 80s and 90s, and even some of those 100-year-old folks that we still have around, that wasn't there. In God We Trust on the money was not there. These things was not there. So just think about, okay, why would the government sanction something like that? Why would they, I can see standardizing it, the Pledge of Allegiance. I can see if people want to say it, fine. People don't want to say it, fine. They don't have to if they don't want to. But the idea of Americanism and a lot of the ideas that's coming out now, y'all need to think about it. Now, is America a great place to live? Yes, it actually is. I've seen the changes from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. Coming up maybe on the 2001, 21. But think about the different things that have actually gone on here. You have people that had divided this country talk about patriotism out of one side of their mouth and divide the country out of the other. And patriotism takes people. It literally takes people to have patriotism. Because without people, you don't have it. Just like communism, socialism, and all those other things. It takes people. And to create a narrative where and not be completely a narrative about this pledge and about why they did what they did, and not tell the people, not be forthright. That make me think about when the Native Americans always say that certain groups of people spoke with forked tongue. They said one thing out of this side, another thing out of this side. And there wasn't no meeting in the middle. You see the snake tongue go, the little things go there, the little point, yeah. But I'm not going to continue on this. This is just, I wanted people to know what Eisenhower did, and where I think I myself believe it's very important to know your history and why things are the way they are, because it helps you to make good decisions about a lot of things. It helps you to pray and seek God on a lot of things. So with that said, again, I'm going to put the link for the freedom of religion in the United States. I'm put the link of that in the comments, and I'm going to put the definitions of those two words in the comments so y'all can know what bulwark and know what patriotism, what it means. So with that said, you guys have a good rest of your day.